Okay, so you're listening to this and you're probably thinking AI, right? It feels like
Yeah.
AI is everywhere these days, and honestly, it's kind of hard to keep up with it all.
Yeah, I mean, it really does feel like every single day there's some new breakthrough or some new warning about AI taking over the world or whatever.
But beneath all the hype, there's this really, really fundamental question, and that's like, how do we actually make sure that these crazy, powerful systems that we're building are actually going to work for us, not against us? You know, how do we make sure that they align with what we as humans actually value?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's precisely what we're diving into today. AI value alignment. It gets to the very heart of how we want AI to shape our future.
So think of this deep dive as like your shortcut to understanding this truly crucial concept. We're going deep on a report called AI Value Alignment, Guiding Artificial Intelligence Towards Shared Human Goals, which was put out by the World Economic Forum back in October 2024.
And what we really want to do today is unpack what it truly means for AI to behave in ways that are consistent with our values.
Mm.
The stuff that matters to us as humans,
Hmm.
things like justice and privacy and fairness, but also our ethical principles and societal
Yeah.
norms. And, maybe even more importantly, why this is becoming so unbelievably crucial as AI gets more and more integrated into our lives.
Exactly. And we're not going to get lost in the technical weeds here. I mean, the report does a great job of giving us practical frameworks and methodologies for actually embedding these ethical principles into AI technologies, and that's what we're going to focus on.
And by the time we wrap this up, you should have a really solid understanding of this complex area, hopefully a few aha moments along the way without having to wade through a mountain of jargon.
Okay, so let's jump in. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is AI value alignment at its most fundamental level?
So at its core, it's about ensuring that all the stuff the AI systems do, their actions, their decisions, the outcomes they produce, are in harmony with our values as humans,
Yeah.
our ethical principles,
Yeah.
the norms that our societies are built on, and of course, those fundamental human rights.
So it's about building this kind of ethical framework into AI itself.
Exactly.
The paper makes this interesting distinction between human values and what it calls operational attributes. Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah. So human values are those really core principles that we use to guide how we act and behave as people.
Hmm.
Things like justice, the importance of privacy, our feeling of autonomy, mutual respect. These are like the bedrock of any functioning society.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now, operational attributes, these are more about how well an AI system actually functions. So things like its reliability, how transparent its processes are, and whether it can explain its reasoning,
Yeah.
why it came to a particular decision. And these are super important for creating AI that we can actually trust.
Right.
But they're more about the quality and performance of the system, not really about its ethical alignment with human values.
Hmm.
It's kind of interesting that the paper points out that a lot of the guidelines that are being put out there for responsible AI sometimes mix these two categories up.
That makes sense. So it's not just about making sure that AI works efficiently, but that it operates in a way that reflects like what we believe is right and wrong. The paper also outlines several dimensions of value alignment. What are the core questions we need to ask ourselves here?
So there are a few key dimensions to consider. First and foremost, which human values are we actually aiming to align with? It's not a given that everyone agrees on every value, so that has to be clarified.
Right.
Then there's the question of what does it practically mean for an AI system to be aligned with those values in how it operates? We have to translate the abstract into something concrete.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's the how-to question. How do we actually go about achieving this alignment in a way that's reliable and verifiable? Yeah, how do we actually build it into the AI?
Makes sense.
Fourthly, how can we check and be really sure that an AI is actually operating the way we intended in line with our values?
Yeah, because we can't just take it on faith.
Exactly. Then there's the question of drift.
Mm.
How do we make sure that once the AI is out there doing its thing,
Hmm.
it doesn't gradually start to stray from those values?
That's a good point. And finally, how do we keep the AI aligned as our own values evolve or as we simply understand them better? Because let's face it, things change and our understanding of things changes, and the AI has to be able to adapt to that.
That's a really important point. You've hit on all the key questions, and it really highlights how complex this whole thing is. I mean, even defining something as seemingly straightforward as human values is tough.
Hmm.
The report actually talks about this idea of a value taxonomy. What does that mean?
Yeah, that sounds complicated.
It's actually not as scary as it sounds. So the thing is, we often talk about universal human values, But how we understand those values and how we apply them can be wildly different depending on your culture, your community, even your individual situation. So a value taxonomy is basically a way to categorize all these different values and preferences in a structured way. This helps us analyze and understand how they might be interpreted differently by different people, and ultimately how those values can be implemented or translated into action within various AI applications.
So it's like a roadmap to understanding the values landscape.
Exactly. And the report points out that there are many different approaches to defining these values. You've got things like global declarations like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but then you've also got very specific legal frameworks in individual countries, and even the personal preferences that people might express when they're interacting with an AI.
So it's not just one set of values that applies everywhere.
No, not at all. And this creates some interesting challenges. A globally designed AI might accidentally clash with specific laws in a particular country, or maybe with deeply ingrained social norms in a particular community.
Yeah, I see how that could be a problem.
So it requires a really nuanced approach to alignment. You have to be aware of all these different levels and be able to adapt.
That leads perfectly into the next big point the report raises, which is about cultural differences and how we prioritize values. It seems like this is a really big challenge for people developing AI.
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
So even if there are certain values that most people would agree on, the way we understand those values and the importance we give them can be totally different from one society to the next. Let's think about respect for a second.
Okay.
In one culture, you might show respect by having this formal exchange of business cards. But in another culture, that might be seen as cold or distant. You see?
Yeah, I get it.
When it comes to prioritizing values, some societies might put more emphasis on individual rights and autonomy. But in other societies, the well-being and harmony of the group might be more important.
That's fascinating.
And the report makes this point that these values don't just exist at the societal level. They also exist for individuals, organizations, nations, and even at the global level.
It's like these nested layers of values almost.
Yeah, exactly. And all of this adds even more complexity for AI systems that are designed to be used around the world.
I can only imagine.
For instance, an AI that was built with a certain set of values in mind, say in one country, might run into very different expectations and priorities when it's used in another part of the world.
That makes sense. Are there any real-world examples of this kind of thing?
The paper gives a really interesting example from healthcare, the idea of patient autonomy.
Okay.
In many Western cultures, this means that the individual patient have the right to make decisions about their own medical treatment, after being given all the information, of course.
Right, informed consent and all that.
But in some other cultures, family members often have a much bigger role in those decisions. It's more of a collective approach to healthcare.
So an AI that's helping with healthcare decisions would need to be aware of those differences.
Exactly. It would have to be able to adapt its recommendations or the way it presents information depending on the cultural context.
Mhm.
This really highlights the fact that value alignment isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
Definitely not. So it's not enough to just have good intentions. You need a concrete and practical approach. The report then gets into these technical and organizational considerations. You can't just state your values and call it a day, right?
No, absolutely not. We have to actually make them real. To get there, we need a combination of strong technical solutions and well-defined organizational processes.
Okay.
On the organizational side, it usually starts with really understanding how an AI system might be used in different situations.
So thinking about all the possible scenarios.
Exactly. And then you have to involve all sorts of different stakeholders. You need to get their perspectives on the values that are at play.
It sounds like a lot of talking and listening.
It is. And then you need to make sure that the people who are actually building and using these AI systems are trained and educated about these value considerations. They have to understand what's at stake.
So it's about creating a culture of awareness.
Exactly.
Now, on the technical side, what kind of tools and methodologies are we talking about? Like, how do you actually embed values directly into AI systems?
So there are a bunch of different approaches, and they're evolving all the time as AI gets more sophisticated. One basic but really important thing is making sure that the data used to train AI models doesn't contain biases that could lead to the AI behaving in ways that go against our values.
Right, because the AI learns from the data. So if the data is biased, the AI will be biased too.
Exactly. And then there are more complex techniques like inverse reinforcement learning or IRL.
Okay.
Imagine the AI is like a child trying to figure out what's right and wrong by watching how you behave. That's kind of what IRL is like.
So it's learning by example.
Yeah. And then there's something called reinforcement learning with human, or AI feedback, RLHF for short.
Catchy.
That's a more direct approach where we basically tell the AI good job, or no, that's not right, to guide it towards actions that are aligned with our values.
Mm-hmm.
We can use these tools at different stages of AI development, from the initial design and training phases all the way to ongoing monitoring.
So it's not a one-time thing, it's a continuous process.
Exactly.
The paper brings up this example of fairness in AI systems that classify things or make predictions. That seems to be a really hot topic these days. How do the technical organizational elements we talked about work together in that area?
Yeah, so when we talk about fairness in AI, things like credit scoring systems or algorithms that are used to predict things like recidivism rates,
Yeah.
there's always a risk of bias creeping in. And the paper points out that even before the recent boom in generative AI, a lot of work was already being done to address this.
All right.
Technically, it's about developing methods to detect and reduce bias in both the data that's used to train the AI and in the models themselves.
So basically cleaning up the data and making sure the AI isn't learning bad habits.
Right. But the technical stuff isn't enough on its own. You need organizational support, too.
What does that look like?
That means actually talking to diverse groups of people who might be affected by the AI and getting their input. It means educating the developers about all the different aspects of fairness. And it means making sure that the teams who are building AI are diverse themselves.
That's important.
You also need to engage with the wider community and understand their perspectives on fairness in that particular application. It's not a one-size-fits-all concept. You need to have clear governance frameworks that put fairness front and center. And you need to keep doing research into potential biases.
Wow, it's a whole ecosystem of things.
It is. It's about making sure that we're choosing the right technical approaches, but also defining what fairness means in that specific context.
Right, because fairness might mean different things to different people.
Exactly. And the paper points out that we need some level of societal agreement when it comes to validating whether an AI is truly aligned with our values, especially when we're talking about what level of bias might be acceptable.
That sounds super tricky.
It is. Even if we can agree on what fairness means in a particular situation,
Yeah.
figuring out how much bias, if any, is okay ethically is a really tough question.
Who gets to decide that?
Right. That's the big question. This really underscores how important it is to have these broader societal conversations and to figure out what our shared norms and expectations are when it comes to AI. And the paper also brings up transparency as a key part of this.
Yeah.
If we don't understand how an AI system works and the values that are driving it, it becomes almost impossible to assess whether it's truly aligned with what we want.
Yeah, it's like a black box. And without transparency, it's hard to build trust. So transparency isn't just a nice to have, it's absolutely essential for effective value alignment. And all of this effort leads not just to a well-behaved AI, but also to really thorough documentation. What kind of stuff should this documentation include?
It should be very comprehensive. So first of all, it should clearly state which human values were considered during the design and development process.
Okay.
It should describe the tests and evaluations that were done to assess the AI's alignment with those values. And it should explain the techniques that were used, both technical and organizational, to achieve that alignment. It should also clearly lay out the specific situations where it's appropriate to use that AI system.
It's like a user manual for the AI's ethics.
Exactly. And importantly, this documentation isn't a one-and-done thing. It needs to be constantly updated as we learn more about how the AI performs in the real world. It's an ongoing process of learning and refining.
So adapt and improve. Now, the report also talks about shifting the focus of AI away from just serving private interests and towards benefiting humanity as a whole. That seems like a pretty ambitious goal.
It's a big goal, for sure. But the idea is that if we can truly align AI with fundamental human values, it should lead to AI becoming a force for good in the world.
Okay.
It has to be more than just a technology that benefits a few companies or individuals.
Right. It should be working for everyone.
Exactly. And this requires a real commitment to understanding the incredible diversity of human cultures and getting experts from all different fields to work together. It's a multidisciplinary challenge.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about understanding people.
Exactly. And because the values that communities hold dear can change over time, the way we approach AI alignment also needs to be flexible and inclusive. We need to constantly get input from a diverse group of people. It's not a static thing.
It's constantly evolving.
Right. And the whole point of this is to make sure that AI development is guided by a concern for the well-being of the community and that it's used to prevent harm, and make our lives better.
Makes sense. So to get a grasp on all this diversity of values, the report takes a deep dive into this value taxonomy we talked about earlier. It looks at values that come from all sorts of different sources.
Yeah, so it's really comprehensive. It starts by looking at these international instruments, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These represent goals that a lot of the world has agreed on, even if they're kind of aspirational.
Right, like a shared vision for humanity.
Exactly. And it also looks at things like the Geneva Conventions, which are super important when we're thinking about AI being used in war or conflict.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a whole other can of
For
worms.
sure. And it also includes the OECD AI principles, which are these guidelines that have been endorsed by a lot of countries and are all about making sure that AI is developed and used in a way that respects human rights and democratic values.
So that's kind of like the global framework. But what about the deeper philosophical ideas that shape our values?
So the taxonomy doesn't just look at laws and agreements. It also digs into ethical principles and moral philosophy. The point is that a lot of our values and social norms and even some of the existing guidelines for AI ethics are based on these deeper philosophical ideas.
Okay.
So the report mentions Western ethical frameworks like utilitarianism and deontology, which have been influenced by major religions.
You're right.
But it also stresses how important it is to look at philosophies from other parts of the world, like Confucianism and Buddhism from Asia, or ideas that have come out of African thought. And the main takeaway is that these different traditions can lead to different ways of thinking about what's right and wrong.
That's a good point.
And a truly global approach to AI governance needs to recognize and respect all of these different perspectives.
So we need to be open to different ways of thinking.
Absolutely.
What other elements does this taxonomy cover?
It also looks at national laws and regulations, because those are super important for making sure AI systems don't break the law wherever they're being used.
Yeah, of course. Laws are different in different places. Yeah.
Exactly. The paper gives examples like Thailand's lèse-majesté law, Singapore's Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, or POFMA, and data protection rules like GDPR in Europe, and all the different data privacy laws in the US. And then beyond official laws, it also looks at social norms and common practices. These are those unwritten rules and expectations that can really influence whether people trust AI or not.
So it's not just about what's legal, it's about what's considered acceptable in a particular culture.
Right. And the paper even mentions this World Values Survey, which is a tool that researchers use to try to understand these deep-seated cultural values.
Interesting.
Finally, the taxonomy looks at human preferences when it comes to specific AI applications.
Okay.
So, for example, what kind of personality traits do people expect in a virtual health assistant compared to a chatbot that's helping them with customer service?
So, like, do we want our AI to be friendly or formal?
Exactly. Those preferences are often uncovered through things like user studies and feedback, and they need to be taken into account during the design process. It has to be transparent. People need to know what choices were made and why.
So it's about aligning the AI with what people actually want and expect. It sounds like this taxonomy is a pretty powerful tool for considering all the different layers of values that need to be addressed in AI alignment.
It's definitely helpful.
The paper also talks about this idea of design for values. What's that all about?
It's about being proactive. It's about making sure that human values are built into the very fabric of how we design AI right from the start.
Okay.
It's about making ethical considerations part of the core design process instead of just tacking them on at the end as an afterthought.
I like that. So it's like ethics by design.
Exactly. And it means paying attention to things like sustainability, privacy, and safety from the very beginning when you're making those initial design choices.
So are there any particular methods that go along with this design for values approach?
The paper talks about the idea of a glass box, which is all about making sure that we can understand how the AI makes decisions.
So no more black boxes.
Right. It's about being transparent and accountable. So the glass box approach means translating those abstract moral values into concrete rules that we can actually check and verify. And then you need to have constant monitoring to make sure the AI is actually following those rules.
So it's not enough to just set the rules. You have to make sure they're being followed.
Exactly. The paper also gives examples of how values like patient autonomy and healthcare fairness and credit scoring algorithms and safety in self-driving cars can be turned into specific requirements and methods for validating whether the AI is doing what it should be doing.
So it's about making those high-level values real in the way AI actually works. Now we've talked about this value alignment process throughout our conversation. Does the paper give a more step-by-step explanation of what that process looks like?
Yes, it does. It emphasizes that value alignment isn't just a one-time thing. It has to be integrated into the entire life cycle of an AI system.
From beginning to end.
And it's guided by these principles of responsibility,
Like what?
like making sure that AI can explain its decisions, that it operates transparently, and that it's robust and reliable.
Makes sense.
And all of this is super important for building trust and making sure that people feel like they're still in control in a world where AI is becoming more and more powerful.
Absolutely.
So the paper breaks the value alignment process down into three main phases: conception and analysis, design and development, and then deployment, operation, and use.
Okay, let's go through those one by one. What happens in the conception and analysis phase?
That's where the groundwork is laid. You start by figuring out which human values are most relevant to the specific AI system you're building.
Okay.
And to do that, you need to talk to a diverse group of stakeholders, the people who might be affected by the AI.
Right, so getting different perspectives.
Yes. And then you need to do a risk assessment to try to anticipate any potential ethical problems that might arise. But importantly, this phase is also about figuring out how to translate those high-level values into concrete guidelines that can be used during the design and development phase.
Can you give an example?
So let's say you're talking about the value of fairness.
Okay.
In one context, fairness might mean ensuring that everyone has equal access to a particular service, regardless of their background or their circumstances. That becomes the practical definition of fairness that guides the next phase.
So you're going from a general concept to a specific rule.
Exactly. And involving a wide range of stakeholders throughout this phase is absolutely crucial because you want to make sure that you're considering as many different perspectives and needs as possible right from the start.
You don't want to be blindsided later on.
Exactly. Now, once you have those guidelines in place, the next phase, design and development, kicks in.
Okay, so what happens there?
That's where you actually start building the AI system.
Right, making it real.
And the focus here is on making sure that those values you identified earlier are baked into the AI's architecture and its functionality.
Okay.
So this might involve using specific design techniques to make sure that the AI's algorithms are promoting fairness and reducing bias.
That's important.
You also need to make sure that the AI handles data in a secure and responsible way that protects people's privacy.
Right.
And then you start creating prototypes of the system and testing them with users to see if the AI is actually behaving the way you intended it to based on those human values.
So it's like a feedback loop you're constantly testing and refining.
Exactly. And finally, you need to come up with ways to measure the AI's performance against those values once it's deployed in the real world.
So you can track whether it's staying on course.
Precisely. And then the final phase is all about what happens once the AI is out there in the wild being used by real people.
So deployment, operation, and use.
Right. This is about making sure that the AI continues to operate in a way that's aligned with those values, even as things change in the real world.
Because the real world is messy and unpredictable.
For sure. So you need to have ways to monitor the AI's behavior and detect any signs that it might be drifting away from those intended values. You also need to make sure that the system is robust and reliable, that it can handle all the different challenges and unexpected situations that might come up in the real world.
It's like sending your kid off to college.
Exactly. And you need to be able to get feedback from users so you can identify and address any problems that might emerge once the AI is actually being used by real people.
Because you can't anticipate everything in advance.
Right. And finally, you need regular audits to make sure that the AI is still complying with all the relevant ethical guidelines and regulations and with the values that your organization is committed to.
So it's a continuous cycle of monitoring, feedback, and improvement.
It has to be. It's not a one-time fix.
So it sounds like creating truly value-aligned AI requires a deep and lasting commitment at every level, from the people who are writing the code to the leaders of the organizations that are deploying these systems.
Totally agree.
The last part of the report we're looking at today focuses on the relationship between values and red lines. That sounds like a really crucial part of making sure AI is used responsibly.
Absolutely. The paper makes it very clear that value alignment and the idea of ethical red lines in AI are two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
Red lines are those non-negotiable boundaries that AI systems should never cross.
Hard limits.
Right. And they're essential for making sure that AI respects our core ethical standards and doesn't violate basic human rights or those deeply held norms that our societies are built on.
Can you give an example of a red line?
So one really important red line might be that an AI system should never be allowed to make a decision that could directly harm a human being without some kind of human oversight. Like a human needs to be in the loop somewhere.
So no Skynet situation where the AI decides to launch the nukes.
Right. Or another red line might be that you can't use AI in a way that systematically discriminates against certain groups of people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the idea is that by embedding those core human values that we talked about into the design and the operation of AI systems, we're creating a kind of safeguard that helps to prevent those systems from behaving in unethical ways.
So value alignment helps us figure out where those red lines should be and why they're so important.
Exactly.
Now, the paper makes a distinction between global red lines and local red lines. What's the thinking behind that?
So having global red lines is really important because it creates a kind of baseline ethical standard that should apply to all AI systems, no matter where they're built or where they're used.
So it's like a universal code of ethics for AI.
Right. But the paper also recognizes that sometimes specific situations or the way an AI is being used might require more specific rules tailored to that particular context.
So local adaptation.
Yeah, exactly. Because different societies might have different expectations or different concerns that need to be addressed.
Makes sense.
So, for example, in one country, there might be really strict laws about protecting certain types of data or speech. And so you would need to have a red line that makes sure the AI doesn't violate those laws in that specific context.
So it's about balancing those global principles with local needs. What steps should organizations and policymakers take to establish these red lines?
Well, the paper outlines several important steps. First of all, you need to do really thorough risk assessments to figure out what could go wrong and where those red lines need to be.
So identifying the potential harms.
Exactly. And then you need to involve a wide range of stakeholders to get their input and make sure that those red lines reflect the values and concerns of the community.
So it's not just experts deciding in a vacuum.
Right. You need to have buy-in from the people who will be affected, and then you need to have regular audits to check that AI systems are actually sticking to those red lines. And you need to keep records of those audits. You also need to have systems in place to monitor the AI in real time so you can catch any violations and intervene if necessary.
So it's like an early warning system.
Right. And then before you even deploy the AI, you need to have really robust testing procedures to make sure that it's not going to cross those red lines. And you need to have clear metrics to measure whether it's adhering to those rules.
So you're not just hoping for the best.
No, you need to be able to demonstrate that it's working the way it's supposed to. And then transparency is super important. People need to understand how those red lines are built into the system and how they're enforced.
So no more black boxes.
Right. And of course, there always needs to be human oversight and accountability. Someone needs to be responsible for making sure that the AI is behaving ethically and for stepping in if something goes wrong. And finally, we need to be prepared to update those red lines as technology advances and as our understanding of AI ethics evolves.
So it's a continuous process of learning and adapting.
It has to be.
Mm.
The paper really emphasizes that the people who are designing, developing, and deploying these systems are the ones who are ultimately responsible for making sure those red lines are respected. It's a huge responsibility.
It really highlights the importance of the human element in all of this.
Exactly. As AI gets more and more sophisticated, we can't just rely on the technology itself to be ethical. We need to be actively involved in shaping its development and its use.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive into a topic that's only going to become more important in the years to come. To recap some of the key takeaways, we've learned that making sure AI is aligned with our values is absolutely crucial for ensuring that this technology benefits humanity. It's a complex and dynamic process that requires us to think carefully about ethical principles at every stage of the AI lifecycle.
We've also talked about the importance of striking a balance between making sure AI systems are technically competent and making sure that they're also aligned with our deepest values. It's not enough for AI to be smart, it also has to be good.
And we've explored all these different enablers, like having clear frameworks and guidelines involving humans in a meaningful way, being willing to change our organizations, and conducting thorough audits and assessments. These are all essential for making sure that values are actually embedded in AI systems.
And it's an ongoing effort. We need to keep talking to each other, keep doing those audits, and be flexible enough to adapt to different ways of understanding those values.
And we can't forget about the importance of those AI ethics red lines. They're crucial for preventing harm and making sure that people trust AI.
So as AI keeps evolving, thinking about these issues and taking action to align AI with our values isn't just a technical challenge, it's a reflection of who we are as humans. It's about deciding what kind of future we want to build with this technology.
That's a really powerful thought. What does a truly human-centered AI future look like to you? What role do these values play in shaping that future?
That's a great question, and one that each of us needs to grapple with.
And if you're interested in exploring this topic further, we highly recommend checking out the original report from the World Economic Forum. It has a ton of resources and information, including a list of organizations that are working on these issues. It's a great place to start if you want to learn more about this fascinating and crucial field of AI value alignment. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.